Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with us, and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. Before we get to the show, I just want to mention a few things. Initial Ascent packs, they're awesome. I used the 2K all last season. I'm still using it now for stuff. I'm going to be using it for training for prepping for my hunt and getting some miles in with some weight on my back. And I just recently picked up a 6K, and it's going to be awesome as well. Plan on using it on my elk hunt along with the 2K if I'm doing some day hunts or something and having a base camp. But if I'm packing on my back and going in there, depending on where I'm at, I'm going to be using that 6K. Dennis and Joe are amazing people. What's awesome about that company is you can reach out to them, and they're the ones who are going to answer your call and actually talk to you about their product. And you're going to even get a handwritten note from them thanking you for your purchase and wishing you luck on that hunt. And I just find that is super awesome and amazing in this day and age to have somebody that does that for you and actually handwrites a note for you is just amazing. And on top of that, it's an American-made product. And one thing about this podcast is, and myself, is just that anything that's American-made that I can support or get behind and it's a quality product, I'm going to talk about it. This is not a paid promotion. I'm honestly just talking to you about an amazing pack. So check them out. If you don't have one or you're looking for a pack, give them a try. You'll like it for sure. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about treelineacademy.net. Treelineacademy.net is the most comprehensive e-scouting course ever made. Mark Livesey is just an amazing wealth of knowledge, and he's willing to share that with everybody. So check that out and see what's going on there with that. Use promo code PC2020. Save yourself 20% on sign up. It's awesome. And actually, it's not 20%. It's $20. Save yourself $20 off a sign up. Then the next one I want to talk about is Basemap. Basemap app with their hunt data, the online mapping system for e-scouting, setting waypoints, smart markers. So you have all your hunt data on the wind and anything, as long as you have a cell signal. It's absolutely amazing. There's so much more that's coming out. They've updated their offline maps, so they're way faster than they used to be, which I know a lot of people were actually kind of complaining about that, but now they're lightning fast. I've downloaded them, used them. It's awesome. On top of that, they've got some new updates that are coming out that are just going to blow you away. Can't talk about them yet, but we will be talking about them. So check them out. Use promo code PC25. Save yourself 25% on sign up, only on the website, not on the app. And with that being said, let's get to our show. All right, so I'm sitting here and I am talking to Bryan Broderick. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Bryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and we will go ahead and kind of just roll into this thing.
Sure. I live in southern Alabama, LA, lower Alabama, if you will. So lived down the Gulf Coast, born and raised down here, and been bow hunting, I guess, going on 36 years now, and started hunting out west, doing a lot of public land hunting about 30 years ago. So when I was 18, I started, and pretty much spent my whole life just working so I can hunt. So that's basically my story in a nutshell.
So when did you decide that you wanted to go out west and kind of pursue game out west? What led you to that?
Well, I consumed everything available to me once I discovered hunting and especially bow hunting. Consumed all the media, everything I could get my hands on. This is all prior to outdoor television and things like that. Certainly pre-internet.
So you mean like actual books and magazines and things that
you
people
bet.
don't consume that much anymore?
No, my whole room was just stacks of hunting magazines. I had some of the old original Eastman stuff. I had Fur Fishing Game.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the original stuff back then, some of the original traditional bow hunter stuff. I mean, I just was eat up with it. And so And then, of course, you start reading the stories about hunting out west. And for a Southern boy, it was super romantic to read about it, and just consumed everything I really thought about. So um, I was super fortunate. There was a gentleman at our church that worked with our youth group, and he had been in the military and had been stationed um, out in Arizona and New Mexico during his tenure in the service. And he was an incredible outdoorsman, incredible hunter, incredible trapper. One of the guys that he would stand out today. He was that good, and so, but back then he was just a unicorn. And I was super fortunate to have a relationship with him through our church, and he was an incredible mentor. And he's the one that started me bow hunting. No one in my family bow hunted; they just gun hunted. And he got me started trapping and fly fishing and all kinds of great things. And he and I went out west to New Mexico the fall after I graduated high school. And he took me out to a unit where he had hunted in the past when he was living out there. And that was in 1991. So I've been going ever since. And then it got a little obsessive to where I was quitting my job, usually around the middle end of August every year, wherever I was working at the time. Most of the time it was at a hunting and fishing store. So it was kind of an accepted,
Practice,
leave of absence
right?
type of deal. Yeah. So, the cold front flu was an acceptable excuse to miss work. But anyway, I would leave and put an old crappy camper shell that I bought secondhand on the back of my truck and drive out west. And I'd stay out there pretty much the entire month of September and hunt multiple states. Then it started creeping into October. Then I started driving up into Canada. And so it just got to be where it was, I don't know, that's what I did for a living in the fall. I felt like I was a bow hunting gypsy because I would work all year to save up enough money to be able to live out of my truck for a month or two in the fall. And I was going to school at the time, so I would take the fall semester off instead of the summer like everyone else.
Right.
And so the fall was my summer. And, all my buddies were like, man, you're crazy. You're missing football games and the parties, and nobody wants to miss the fall in college. I was like, nah, I'm good. So a lot of alone time, on the mountain, a lot of sketchy situations, some pretty close calls at times. And but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So that's just what I did. It's what I've kind of spent my whole life doing, is working to be able to do the things I wanted to do.
So in the days, obviously before GPSs and all those fancy navigation tools and cell phones and all the fancy maps and stuff,
right?
How did you find your way around? I mean, did you actually learn land navigation somewhere that you knew those skills from, reference points on a map and compass?
Yes, sir.
I mean,
Yep. So the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, he taught me the basics of that. When I would go to a new area, I would actually call like the Forest Service. I would call the Department of Game and Fish and talk to biologists. And you got to realize back then, you could call a biologist and they would be honest with you, and they would tell you, some pretty true stats. And they weren't getting calls every day like they probably are now. They're probably, they weren't, basically state sponsored hunting consultants like they are now.
Right.
So, when a, young Southern boy would call them and say, hey, I'm fixing to drive out from lower Alabama and come out there and hunt for a couple of weeks, they just laugh because they were thinking, man, this kid's going to wash out in 5 minutes. They had no idea I'd been there before or been around there. And so I'd get some pretty good information. And then, you had to like physically get the book from the USGS. And you go through the book and you would check and write down the numbers of the topo maps that you wanted and to what scale. And you would fill out a paper order form. You would actually write a check and you'd snail mail it out there, and then they'd snail mail you your paper maps. And my mother was a principal at the time. And so I would go to her school after school, and I would laminate in the library. I'd laminate all my topo maps. Um, so because they weren't water, you can order them waterproof now.
Yep.
Or water
Yeah.
resistant, but why? I don't know if people even know what paper maps are now. I'm thinking that the water resistant paper topo maps are like new age stuff, but nobody uses that crap anymore. But anyway, no, I'd laminate them and
Get your highlighters
go out there
and
with
highlight stuff on them, and
and it looks so different. You'd get out there and there'd be a learning curve, but back then there was always somebody around. There was a local coming down the mountain, or there was a logger. There was somebody, and you could just flag someone down and go, "Hey, I think I'm here." They're like, "No, you're 30 miles from where you think you are." So you'd get some really good guidance, and you just kind of struggle through it. And the first GPS I ever saw was in Idaho, and I had sat down at a junction of a trail in the Limhi zone, and I was pretty tuckered out. I had all my camp on my back. I got in about 4.5, 5 miles, something like that. And it was a pretty good push, pretty good, a lot of elevation gain. So I sat down, and I was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I looked down, at my feet to my right, and there was a GPS there, and it was still on. Now this thing was the size of like a brick, like a house brick. I mean, it was big, but it was a one of those old big GPSs that had the little bitty screen on it. And you just, you had to like punch through the numbers and the letters. It took forever to type anything in. But somebody had left it there. And that's the first one I ever saw. I had no idea how to use it, but I just turned it off and stuck it in my bag. And that's the first GPS that I ever saw. It was on the mountain there in Idaho. That would have been in maybe 94, 95, something like that. Somewhere around there, I can't remember. And after that, I started realizing, that as they got smaller, that you could have that as a backup plan.
Yeah.
And so as they got a little smaller, I started using them as a kind of an emergency type thing. But I still very rarely ever used them, and never use them still today. It's pretty much just paper nav and going off maps, things like that.
So are you primarily like, truck camping or having a base camp somewhere and then trekking out from camp, or are you backpack hunting now?
Well, Luke, now I am. Now I'm a truck camping base camp guy.
Yeah.
I'm half the man I used to be, so I can't do the things I did when I was in my 20s. And back in 13 or 14, I actually had a building collapse while I was in it.
Oh.
So I had some pretty substantial damage and couldn't walk for about 6 months. Had to start walking again. Anyway, long story short, I can't do all the things I used to do. I'm probably 70% of what I could do prior to that. And so early on days, I did a lot of backpack, everything on your back, hunting. And I basically would load camp every day and stay mobile until I got in them. Fortunately, having that experience for 15 or 20 years, I got to explore a lot of country. I got to figure out how elk and deer move through country and how they react to different weather conditions, pressure, things like that. And for the most part, a lot of the areas that I hunted even back then still can produce for me. They're not near as good, of course, but they can still produce. But I can hunt those areas more efficiently and not be as physically demanding of a hunt.
Right.
Because I know how to, basically set up a camp and be within striking distance of where elk should be. It doesn't always work, but usually if you schedule yourself enough time, you can get into elk and deer. If you have a lot of plan B, C, D, E's, and F's, that
Right.
you can just kind of move through the progression till you get in them.
I found that, so my first elk hunt, I didn't have any game plan whatsoever. I thought it would be like, oh yeah, look at the map, find some spots, head out there, you get there, you get, like you said, that whole, wow, this is completely different than what I pictured in my head or looking at a map.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Those maps are flat.
yes, they are. And those lines, some of them, it doesn't look
Mm-hmm.
that tight when you're looking at it, but then you start gauging it and you actually stand there and you're looking up and you're going, oh man, that's a 2,000, foot elevation gain within, less than a quarter or an eighth of a mile traveled. So,
Right.
so, that was like big discouragement. And then, by day 3, you're beaten down. You don't have a game plan anymore. And then, so talking to guys like Mark Livesey and its Treeline Academy, I think that's huge for actually having, like you said, that game plan A, B, C, D, and solidify that, like put it on paper. So when you're out there and you're in the moment and you're feeling beaten down, look at that and, go, okay, man, it's not working out here. I'm going to jump up in elevation because that's where I think they're going to be, because we're not seeing any sign here or anything like that. And then you look at your map or your game plan and then go, okay, yeah, my fourth option, that's at higher elevation. Maybe go check that out. I think that's something that either a seasoned hunter knows or somebody that's had their butt kicked enough to where they said, man, I need to reevaluate this and do that. And I think that's awesome that like you brought that in and have that as how did you formulate that? How did you come up with that?
Well, it was a lot of screw ups, doing it wrong a lot, skinning your knees. But as long as you're pulling good lessons out of every time you kind of step on your pecker there a little bit, you're going to become a better hunter. It's the guys that, here's the problem. Guys will go out and do their do-it-yourself hunts and they'll learn some really valuable lessons. But they will come home and they will prioritize the lessons they've learned behind what they're listening to on podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever. They'll literally take the Western spiel, if you will, and prioritize that over the hard lessons they've learned and physically, gathered themselves. And that's the problem. And what you've got to realize is when you listen, every block in the Western states, there's a guy on every block with a podcast. There's a guy on every block with a YouTube channel. They get 2 or 3 tags a year. They get to hunt about 2 months. They're not like us in the East where we have longer seasons, higher game limits. We actually get to hunt for a lot of the year. They get to hunt for a very short amount of time, a very limited amount of game they can take with the limited tag system. So they talk a lot about hunting. They talk a lot about gear. They just dissect it to the nth degree. The problem is when you're listening to all this stuff, you're listening to the highlight reel. You're listening to Sports Center. You're getting, their 5 best plays out of 15 years, but they're delivering those messages as rules of thumb, which is not what's going to translate for guys like you and I that are driving from the east side of the river out there.
Yeah.
So you've got to really place more value on your own experiences and your own lessons you've learned, and don't deviate from that path that you've actually gathered, the intel you've gathered yourself. I see so many guys do it, and I'm super open and honest with like where I hunt, where I've hunted in the past. If customers call me and they are saying, hey, I'm going here, going there, do you know anything? If I know, I'll tell them. I had a really famous Western guy that I really like a lot that has a really famous Western podcast. And he was sitting on his honey hole on top of a mountain glass at one of his honey holes last year, right before he killed the biggest bull he's ever killed. And one of my buddies from Arkansas, we started I was kind of talking about the areas I hunted and kind of giving him some directions. He walked right in there on him and started talking. And then I was the mutual friend, you know. So I'll send people wherever. If I'm not hunting in there, I don't care. If I am, I don't care. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm about sharing. So, but I have these guys that'll send me these maps or these pins and go, hey, we're going to park here, walk to here. And I'll go, hey guys, you see all those little lines between where you're going and where you're parked? That's a million lines of death, is what that is. You're about to gain about 3,000 feet in 2 miles. You're not going to make it. And you're damn sure not going to make it with 60 pounds on your back, you know? So you have to be realistic about what you can do as an Eastern guy going out west.
Limitations.
You know, I live at sea level. So when I go out there, it's like breathing through a coffee straw. You can't ever get enough air, you know? So you have to, you know, plan how you're going to hunt and plan how you're going to, you know, approach animals. And, you know, I've hunted with so many guys out west that are just incredible hunters. They're incredible athletes or athletic people. And we'll see, you know, an elk across a canyon and they're like, let's go straight to him. And I've got to walk the rim. I'm going to go around the rim to go to the other side. I'm not going to, you know, lose and gain 2,000 feet of elevation to go to an elk because I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to get there and I'm not going to be any good when I get there. I would rather take, you know, another 30 minutes and maintain my elevation and basically side hill or ridge walk all the way around to where I can do it. When I get there, I can still breathe. And that's super important for guys coming from out east going west, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So I kind of wanted to talk to you, which we haven't done yet, but that's awesome because I think our conversation is great. But so anybody listening so far, they may not know who you are.
I just told them who I was.
Well, you did, but you didn't tell them what company you own or what you do as far as that. So we can. I want to dive in. I want to dive into that a little bit because actually, I'm kind of curious myself about the arrow system. So I currently use Day 6 Evo broadheads. I think they're awesome. Right. I like the fact that I can blow through a shoulder blade and take it to a paper wheel with some compound on it and resharpen it and be able to go back out there. I like the fact that when I hit that shoulder blade, I know there's not pieces of aluminum and pieces of blade going all over when I go to field dress that deer.
Sure.
There's none of that that's going to stab me and get my... So, you know, I think there's something to be said for a product that actually is durable, reusable, and easily sharpenable. So, I kind of
Well, I wouldn't get carried away with the easily sharpenable stuff. I always want to be super honest.
Well, it's
so as long as you don't like completely ruin the edge, it's super easy to touch up.
Yes.
And the beauty of what we're doing is that it maintains its edge very well. I think the point you're making that it retains its edge.
But I mean, what is it as far as Rockwell scale hardness? It's like what? 50 something, 59, 58, somewhere in there.
58, 59, yeah.
Okay. And see, I know that because I'm kind of a knife guy. I love knives, right? So S30V steel.
Sure.
I mean, it's a quality tool steel, and you put the edge on it. It has great edge retention, depending on, you know, what hardness you put to it. And
yes,
you know, with the right sharpening fixture, even if you do kind of obliterate that edge, you can restore that. And then be able to touch it up, like I said, with a paper wheel, like I do on my grinder. I think that's an awesome way to just put that back to where I can literally put a little spit on my arm and shave the hair right off of it. So,
right. Well, I think the point I was making is that I don't ever want to mislead anyone. Like we never say, like you'll never hear us say field point accurate because it's physics. There's no way that a broadhead's going to shoot the same at a field point. Once you get past certain distances, you've got drag, aerodynamics. It's just not going to allow it. So I don't ever want to mislead people. The reason I chose the steel that we chose is because I love a good steel too. I'm also a real knife guy, not a disposable blade knife guy. Um, so, and I'll I'll usually put a knife to, these are real numbers, not internet numbers, but, and not just all mine, but I'll put a knife to somewhere around 50 plus animals a year. So, and just by the nature of geography, where I live and where we hunt and how long our seasons are. So for me, having a steel that will retain its edge is super important. And I've broken so many disposable blade or replaceable blade knife blades. I'm just never going to use them. They're incredibly dangerous. They don't hold up. I love the sharpness, like the first, 2 or 3 minutes, and then they break. So I'm a knife steel guy too. And so S30V and S35V, they're both very similar. What I like about those is they're not the toughest, but they're right there near the top. They're not the most corrosion resistant, but it's right near the top. Like you can't hardly get anything better. But when it comes to edge retention, they're at the top. And when it comes to, the ability to resharpen them, they're not at the top, but they're close. But what people don't understand is that with a steel like that, if your focus is edge retention, which for me it is, it's not going to be super easy to resharpen if you completely dull it. But the beauty of a blade like that, like our broadheads and knives that are made that way, is that if you don't damage it, it's going to hold its edge so well that it takes almost no effort to bring it back to factory sharpness after it's been through an animal. And for me, anybody that's ever hunted with me knows that it's literally shoot a lot, dig the arrows out of the mud, rinse them off in the creek or in the, the swamp. It's a rinse and repeat thing. I've got to have a blade that's going to hold its edge, because if not, I would just constantly be resharpening heads. And I just don't, who wants to do that? So that's why I picked that steel. I didn't want it to corrode, but I wanted it to be number one on edge retention, because once you move away from the whitetail world and you get into elk, moose, you're dealing with a lot coarser hair. You're also dealing with a lot thicker hide. Even all the tissue inside those animals, their sinew, all of that stuff is so much tougher than like a whitetail. So as that arrow's going through and that head is cutting, it's constantly meeting different densities and different matter, of different organic tissue that is just trying to dull that blade. And so edge retention for me, for a broadhead, is just as critical it is for a skinning knife. If you're trying to take one knife in that's going to have the ability to clean and quarter and skin a whole elk, it's the same thing with a head. With a broadhead, you have a blade angle issue. You can't always have that very slight blade angle like a knife where you can draw the knife and drag it to cut. There's going to be angles because of the geometry to where not only is it trying to slice, but it's also chopping because of the different angles. That's where the edge retention is more important than anything, because you don't have the ability to have this super long, skinny broadhead that doesn't have any resistance against the edge, and it'll stay sharp because it's not getting dull by means of that blade angle. So that's the long version of why we chose what we chose. I don't really give a crap about shooting basement walls with my broadheads. So if there's a steel out there that is 20% stronger at shooting basement walls, that's fine. I'm not starting a YouTube channel and shooting basement walls and doing, metallurgy charts. I'm building a broadhead to be efficient for killing animals and repeatedly efficient for killing animals. That's what we designed.
Yeah.
So I've been playing with this for 15 years. So it's not like we just decided to do it, you know.
So let's sidebar here. I want to talk about that knife
Mhm.
you're carrying, because I mean, what you're saying to me sounds like a David Bowie knife or something like that. Something that's I mean, what were you carrying that you're doing all these animals without having to resharpen?
Oh, it's a pocket knife. It's like a everyday ADC knife. Like
Who,
I'm
so who made
the
it? Like Chris Reeves or something, or who?
well, no. I have lots of different knives. But so I have. All right, so we're probably the only hunting company that doesn't have our own like skeleton frame knife for sale, because I think everybody in the hunting industry has a CNC'd out skeleton frame
Pretty
knife.
close, probably.
Yeah, so we're the weirdos that don't sell a knife like that. For me, I'm a little old school. I have a knife in my pocket when I leave the house, and it's there all day. When I'm at the farm or if I'm hunting or on the mountain, I have a knife in my pocket. And that is the knife that I end up skinning, cleaning, quartering with, really more than anything. I will carry some other knives for backup, but I guess I'm too lazy. I'm not going to go digging through my pack to get the fancy quote skinning knife. I usually pull my knife out of my pocket that I maintain an edge on, and that's what I usually knock the sides off all the deer and hogs with.
Yeah.
That's, and that's the way everyone in my family and everyone I've ever hunted with, they had, a case or something in their pocket, and that's what you knock the guts out or knock the sides off a deer or a hog or whatever with. You
Yeah.
clean fish with it. I mean, I guess it's just
so I was just wondering, like,
but
if your knife was like a dendritic cobalt or stellite or something like that, to where
no. Like, so the knife I use the most is one. I don't know if you've ever heard of HMC knives, Helion Machine Collective.
no,
Um,
I don't think I have.
yeah, he's a super nice. He's a great human, but HMC, and he'll pretty much make what you want. And I've got some of his, and I've got a knife that I have in my pocket. It's his most of the time. It's a S35, blade. It's easy to, once you get it sharpened, it's just incredibly easy to maintain an edge on, as long as you don't abuse the blade when you're cleaning. Some people abuse the crap out of their knife when they're working on an animal, and they're frustrated because it doesn't, make it all the way through and maintain its edge. Well, you got to be smart about what you're doing. You've got to think through the process of, okay, I'm going to minimize how much coarse hair I've got to cut through to open this animal up. And I'm going to minimize, the things that are going to be damaging to the edge. I'm going to do all this work that I can do before I ever start attacking ball joints, cutting sinew, tendons, things like that. You've got to do it in a process to, make that edge last, especially with an elk.
Yeah.
I mean, their hair is just so much more coarse than a whitetail is, and then their hide's 3 times as thick. So it's just a different ballgame.
I used to have, well, I borrowed it from my dad. I believe it was a David Bowie, Boye.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's still around anymore, but I borrowed the knife. I went down. My dad's buddy used to help guide on a hunting ranch down in Missouri. And I went down there and we dressed out 5 hogs, nice size hogs, before
Yeah.
it never needed a sharpening the entire time. It was 5 animals and it was still razor sharp. I remember it to this day. I was like, man, this is the coolest knife ever. But super hard to regain an edge once you lose that edge, because it's so hard. It actually hard on your tooling to try and resharpen it. But so I kind of wanted to get into. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying our broadheads would be the same way, as long as you maintain the edge on it, and touch it up. You don't ever have to like really start over with like a low grit, grind to bring a burr back up. But on any high end knife steel, or even our heads or other heads that have that kind of steel, people that experience struggles to resharpen them, it's really a function of they're not starting over. They're trying to just hone it. And if you lose too much of that edge, you've got to go back and bring a burr back up. If no one takes anything away from this podcast other than that, if you're working on a broadhead blade or a knife blade for more than about 5 minutes and it's not getting any sharper, you're starting with too high of a grit, and you're not waking the blade back up. You've got to basically get that thing, a new burr pulled up. If you'll do that first, you can sharpen a knife in a minute.
So that brings me to a question then. What is the angle or the bevel of the grind on your edge of the broadhead?
20 degrees.
20 degrees.
20 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never had to go that far yet, but if I did, now everybody knows 20 degrees is the correct angle to get your diamond on there.
Yeah. Well, I'm really underselling our heads. I mean, because they hold their edge so dang well.
I haven't had to do it yet. I actually haven't.
No.
The paper wheel is the only thing I've used. That and like a day to day, I actually don't even touch them on the paper wheel. I'll like, if I'm taking them in and out of the quiver, like every day or every other day, I'll take them on a strop and I've got a strop with some polishing compound, and that's enough just to buff that edge back to where you get that micro edge on there, that polish, and then it brings it back sharp enough to where it'll shave hair. But
and cardboard will work just as well, believe it or not.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah, a cardboard box. Yeah, it's the compound, the buffing compound, that does a great job. But put a little buffing compound in a cardboard box if you don't have like a leather strop or a piece of leather, and just drag it backwards. Don't cut against it, and it'll do the exact same thing.
Really? Okay.
And it'll just be, oh yeah.
That's good to know. I mean, I made my own strops, like I said, because knife guy, right? But just a piece of MDF and some wood glue and a piece of leather, and you do a smooth side on one side and the grain on the other, and you put your different polishing compounds on there. Works pretty good.
Yeah, it works great. Yep. You're right.
But so I wanted to get into the actual arrows of the Day 6 arrows.
Okay.
Because I'm kind of curious myself. I don't really know how that outsert works with the tuning and all that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of curious to learn more about it. So can you fill me in on
about
that?
The outsert system?
Well, let's go over the whole system. Because
okay. Well, the arrows are a 4mm. They're a 4mm ID arrow, inside diameter arrow. Our arrows are a little misleading because when people think of 4mm, they think of micro diameter. So they're picturing these little skinny arrows. Now, our arrows are a small diameter arrow, but the way we make them a little different than what the industry standard is. So when you say pull the nock or you cut one and you look at the end, the sidewalls of our arrows are 40 to 100% thicker than just about anything you'll ever see. And it's because of the way we make the arrow. We just do it differently. So we use more material. The beauty of that, by using the more material, is that the arrow is more consistent. You can really get the spine tolerance perfect because you're not relying on. So let's say that to build a traditional arrow, you would have to use 5 layers of carbon. Okay. And you've got to rely on those 5 layers being within 1% tolerance. Make sense?
Yep.
But the way we do it, let's say that there's 10 layers. Well, we don't have to be 1% tolerance, because when you have 10 layers, you're already splitting what the tolerance requirement is. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So while we still use the same quality material that everyone's using, we just use more of it, and it's the way we orient the carbon on the shaft. So the spin-off of that is an incredibly durable arrow. You just about cannot break them. But the most important thing for people to take away from what we're doing is people think it's about the weight. Well, the weight's great. That's what I love. They're focused on the straightness. Our arrows are just 1,000 straight, and it's just because of it's a byproduct of how we make them. The tolerances are extremely tight. For me, the number one thing for an arrow is spine. So if you buy 300 spine shafts, you want them to be all 12 300 spine.
Yeah.
So the industry standard is not that. What's accepted within the archery industry is a very broad range of spine tolerance between a dozen different shafts. If you buy like what ours are achieving is basically, if you buy a dozen 300 spine arrows, they're going to be 305 to 300, 300 to 295. You're talking about a 5,000th tolerance in spine. That's where accuracy comes from. That's where arrow flight comes from. It's the shaft flexing identically as it comes off the bow from shaft to shaft to shaft. The beauty of that, another byproduct of our construction is the way we build them, you don't have to knock tune. So when you're knock tuning arrows within a dozen, you're having to go do a knock tune, rotate the arrow on the knock until you line all the stiff and weak sides up.
Yep.
When you're doing that, the more you have to do that, it's basically telling you the worst tolerance that spine is on that model of arrow. With ours, you don't really have to do that. The knock tuning is just, it's non-existent. They're all the same, and they're all the same 360 around the clock. So that's what my focus always was on. When you combine the outsert system, the way we do it is everything indexes off the center of the shaft, the inside, which is the perfectly straightest part of an arrow. If you're orienting or indexing your component system off like your cut end at the end where you cut the arrow, or the outside diameter, you're now indexing everything off of an imperfect or not perfectly round surface. So if you look at an arrow, it looks like it's perfectly round on the outside, but it's really not. Most of them, all of them, are somewhat egg-shaped, but just at a small degree, you would never notice. But by indexing everything off the inside, it's always going to be perfect and perfectly aligned and perfectly centric with the center of the arrow. And that's where you get the perfect spin from. Everything's lined up. The outsert system is certainly a durability enhancer, having the collar that slides over. The reason I like it, and the reason I like it overall way more than durability or anything else, is for a friction reducer. So if the very front of your arrow is a 308 diameter, which is 5/16, is what the basically standard field points, broadheads, everything's kind of made to that 308. If the very front of your arrow is 308, and then immediately behind that point, after that head goes through a hide, goes into an animal, and where that head and the end of that outsert meet, if that's 308 or your widest, largest diameter, once you get to that point, if everything else behind it is less, it's basically you've created a slightly larger hole for a smaller object to go through with zero friction. Now, people talk about like the tapered shafts. It's the same concept, but the difference is that it's a slow taper as it's going to the back. Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's slowly tapering to a smaller point. With an outsert system on a small diameter arrow, once you go through the hide at that wide point, an inch behind that, you're already down to like a 30% less diameter. So the whole length of the shaft behind the first inch is 30-40% less. So it's not touching anything as it's going through the bigger hole that the outsert's created. Any arrow manufacturer will tell you that system with a small diameter and a larger collar, the penetration benefits are threefold. It's not a slight percentage better. It's like 300% better. And it's not just me saying that. Anyone that makes those arrows will tell you that. Why someone would ever shoot an arrow that's the same diameter front to back is without something like that in the front. This day and age is beyond me.
I shoot a half cert, so I'm kind of in that boat, but not quite. You know, I mean, the half cert is quite a bit larger. It's, you know, the diameter, I guess but it
tapers up to 308.
Yes,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Same concept. Yeah.
Except I like how the outsert, you know, it's longer. It gives it more of that taper than such a drastic as the half cert. The half cert doesn't have as much. So I'm just, you know, kind of curious about. I think it's pretty neat, the concept of that, because in a sense it's like a tapered shaft. You're just not getting the full length of it, right? You know, you're getting it.
That's correct.
Yeah, within a couple inches there. How long are your outserts then?
They're 1.5 inches long. So, you know, it's a 2-piece system. So it's basically a half out like what you have.
Okay.
And then the end of that half out is threaded. And so our collar slides over and it threads on, but you also epoxy that on as well. So we're accomplishing 2 things. We have a mechanical bond with threads, and then we have a chemical bond with epoxy. So once you screw our outserts onto the insert parts or the half out parts, and then you epoxy them on, they're not coming off. You know, you can with threads, you know, screwed on threads and epoxy. I mean, you can, you know, glue the gates of hell shut. You're not getting it open. You know.
So I'm just kind of curious then, is there like a balancing process or like something you got to come up with for the application? I mean, are you unthreading it after you balance it and then putting the epoxy on and doing it? Is there any balancing required or what?
There's not, no. So basically the way we install them is we put a little bit of epoxy on the insert part, and then we screw them together. And then we, you know, basically put the epoxy on the pin, and then on the outside of the shaft, it's a 24-hour epoxy. So it has like a 20-minute work time. So you slide that on. Once you slide it on, you can put it on your spinner and spin it. Now, keep in mind, everything's indexing from the center of the shaft. So usually when you spin them, they're dead nuts. But if you had to rotate them a little bit, you could, to get the, you know, concentricity perfect.
You're putting a pair of like channel locks on them and just kind of give them a tweak, or can you do it?
No, you do it with your fingers.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So we have a 1/1000th tolerance gap between the outside of the shaft and the inside of the collar once you slide that on. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you want that thing to fit perfect. You want it to touch. You don't want it to touch. You actually want, the only thing that's truly touching and indexing is that internal pin that slides into the inside of the arrow.
That way it's
because that's the true part.
Yeah.
All you want to do, now keep in mind, a 1/1000th tolerance, 1/1000th of an inch is a human hair. So we're not talking about, you know, some giant gap there, but you want to fill that void with epoxy. And so it doesn't matter what the OD of the arrow is, whether it's out of round or whatever, as long as you have a tolerance there, when you slide that over, it's indexing on the inside, you fill that void with epoxy, and you're not going to have any pressure points that's going to push the outsert left, right, up or down out of round.
Right.
So once it cures, you've got it completely bonded. And of course, I have, you know, half the bow hunting community now is either a metallurgist, composites engineer, you know, they're all hobby, engineers, physicists, all that good stuff. So they say, oh, well, is that epoxy going to be strong enough, you know, to hold all that together for durability? And I have to remind guys that you got to realize that all your carbon shafts are 50% epoxy.
Right.
People don't realize that. I mean, half your shaft is 50% epoxy, the other half is carbon.
Think about all the stuff you've seen on the farm with JB Weld that held for a long time.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, the half of the arrow is epoxy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, epoxy is incredibly strong medium. So anyway, long story short, that's how our system goes together. It's a mechanical bond and a chemical bond. The beauty of the collar is, and I'm not hacking on your system because we have the half outs as well, just the one piece. Some people like the simplicity of it. But at the end of the day, your arrow and your durability, your broadhead, anything you have, it's only as strong as the weakest point. And the weakest point on an outsert system is where basically where the cut shaft is, to the end of that cut shaft, where the pin and the outsert meet and they butt, the little 165 diameter of the pin where it meets the flat part, the shoulder that butts against the end of your arrow. It doesn't matter how strong all that other stuff is and what it's made of. It's only as strong as that little tiny small diameter arrow,
Right.
Pin part. The beauty of the collar is that collar's transferring that hinge point. Okay. So if you can imagine where the outsert, like the half out, butts to the carbon, that's your weak point right there at that seam. The collar comes over that and it bridges that weak point, and then it transfers it down, onto the shaft.
Right.
And then on the inside of the shaft, the pin extends even further towards the nock past that, and it transfers that hinge even further back. So what you're doing is you're basically overlapping your seams that are creating hinge points or weak points, if you will. You're overlapping them and bonding them all together. So when it's all done, it's transferring basically the weakest point of where the leverage is going to bend, which is the end of the cut arrow. It's transferring it back towards the nock in 3 different locations.
Okay. So I'm kind of curious,
yeah.
What's the weight of the arrows, like grain per inch?
Mm-hmm.
And then my other part to that question would be, what's the weight of the outsert? And then how far does the outsert actually go onto the arrow? And do you recommend like the person cutting or getting the arrow and, cutting it to whatever dimension, or are you leaving it longer because of that, or cutting it shorter because of that?
That's a really good question. So that's really good questions because you asked more than one. So number one, the grains per inch, of course, is going to be different based on the spine.
Right.
So they go anywhere from 8.2, which is our 500, up to 12.2 to our 250. So they're heavier, like a grain or two per inch heavier than what your standard arrow would be. But there's a lot of arrows out there that are similar. As far as the outsert system goes, we have a pretty good variation or a pretty good selection of materials and weights. And so what we try to do is we tried to carve up the materials and design them in 25 grain increments. So you basically can take the lightest system, which is a 25 grain insert portion and a 25 grain collar, combine those two, and they're 50 grains. And then you can go from 50 to 75 to 100 to 125 to 150. And we achieve that by different materials. So it's aluminum, titanium, stainless. And then we've changed the design slightly. So where the weights of the materials and the design, like if you looked at all the collars, all the inserts, they're going to look identical to you. But we've changed the geometry of them just slightly enough so you get that perfect 25-degree increment. So you can mix and match and basically get whatever you want. So for a guy that wants to shoot a 100-grain head, but he wants to have 200 grains up front, he can build a 100-grain outsert with a 100-grain head. Or for a guy that, say, loves a certain head that's only comes in 200, he can use the 50-grain outsert combined weight system and then use the 200-grain head and not be crazy heavy in the front. So we provided those options so guys can pretty much shoot whatever head they want, whatever point weight they want within reason,
Right. No, that's pretty neat. So what's the price point? I'm kind of curious now, what's the price point for shafts and then kind of the actual, outserts and stuff like that? Rough idea. We don't have to get specific, but
yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I'm having to look that up. I told you I'm not an internet hunting industry guy. The shafts are 176 for a dozen, and 174. I'm sorry,
Which isn't that bad, and hopefully my wife's not listening to this episode because I may or may not have paid more. So for
Yeah.
other arrows.
Well, people put us in the expensive category, the high end category, and I'm a very realistic, like black and white thinker, and so it never crossed my mind that we would be placed as expensive based on the things I've been buying, previous to day 6.
Yeah, Victory Victory makes some pretty expensive shafts.
Yeah, well, all the companies do,
Yeah.
but if you think about it, though, if you go buy $180 set of shafts from some of these companies, the components that come with them, I mean, are basically 10-cent, 20-cent little cheap aluminum components. Then you have to go buy some upgraded components if you want to have some durability or options for the ends.
Right.
Our arrows, what they come with that centric component system as a standard.
So that comes with the shafts?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. That's
our shafts are a bargain. If you took our shafts and took our component system away, and then you just went and bought, third-party components. If you did that with any other arrow, you're at $240, $250. I mean, go price some of these other component systems. They're crazy expensive. And ours come with these. I'm a black and white guy. I'm a very transparent person. This is not about money, marketing, or a shell game for us. This is about helping guys become better bow hunters. So I don't mind telling you, like, our cost is $3 an arrow for the components. So we have basically $1.50, like, for the 2 aluminum components that come with them, for the 50 grain outsert system. We're at $3 an arrow just for the components. That doesn't count the arrow, the nocks, all that. So that is what most arrow companies cost for their shafts are. And that's what just our components are. So when we're at $174 for a dozen, if you back $36 off of that just for our cost, you're gonna make me do math. I think that's $138.
I don't know. I was too busy trying to put it all together, but yeah.
Yeah. But it's super cheap for what you get.
Yeah.
The only reason that we're able to do that, Luke, is because we don't have dealers.
Direct.
So you got to realize that, we're direct to consumer. So your standard discount in the archery industry to a dealer is 40 to 50%. So that's what the standard discount is. So you do the math. If you're buying a really high end set of arrows that's $200, the dealer's paying $100 to $120 for those. So that arrow company still has to make money on a $200 set of arrows. They have to make money at $110, $120, because that's what they're selling it for to a dealer. Yeah. There's no way we could do that. I mean, if we did that, we would have to include the little 10-cent inserts or whatever that people get with their arrow standard, and then they would have to go buy components separate. We don't want to do that. Right. We're trying to provide the complete system to a guy where he's just a one-stop shop. He can get, what we feel is the best arrow and component system for hunting, and what we feel is the best broadhead design, material, execution for hunting. We don't give a crap about shooting foam. Not my pig, not my farm. Don't care about offering different weights. I don't understand the concept behind we make the best hunting arrows, but you have 10 models. Well, which one's the best? I don't understand that, So for us, what we're doing is we're basically building, in a very simple thought process, we're building what we think is the best hunting arrow for us and the way we like to hunt. And we're building extras if other guys want to buy some too. And that's basically the whole philosophy behind day 6 is I'm building what I want and other guys can buy it too if they want it. We're building extra. That's pretty much it.
That's pretty cool. One thing I want to circle back to though is, so when a guy says this is the length of arrow I want, or is there something to where because of the outsert and everything that goes along with that, is there a different length, or how do you determine that?
That was one of your questions, and I've got off on a tangent there. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay.
So, but that's a really good question because we get that a lot. That's one of our number one questions. Traditionally, for a bow hunter, they go into their shop, and when they get new arrows, they go in there with their one arrow, and the guy at the shop cuts them 12 more arrows, right?
Yeah.
So seriously, 90% of the bow hunters you ask, what arrows do you shoot? They say, oh, it's a 28-inch arrow. That's what they know, is how long it is. They don't know anything else about the arrow. So when you go into a shop, they're basically going to say, okay, well, if you're a 28-inch draw, you shoot a 28-inch arrow. If you're a 27-inch draw, you shoot a 27-inch arrow. The arrow length historically has been the first thing that people determine. Arrow length should be the last thing that you determine when you're building an arrow, because the length of that arrow is the easiest way to adjust the flex or the dynamic spine.
Correct.
So, and it's not a one size fits all. If you've got 10 guys that are shooting 27 inches, but one's at 62, one's at 65, one's at 68, you can't build the same arrow for that guy. And then if one guy's shooting a 100 grain head, but another guy's shooting a 150, you can manipulate the length of that arrow to offset for that broadhead point weight choice.
Shorten it up.
So what we that's right. Yeah. You shorten it or lengthen it. Yeah. So what we do with guys is when they call us, we say, hey, listen, tell us draw weight, draw length, and point weight. If you've got a bucket full of Thunderhead 125s and you're going to shoot 125s, that's what we need to know, because for me, I want to be able to take what that guy's shooting, draw weight, draw length, and point weight, and build him the perfect arrow, including the length. So to answer your question, when we tell guys you want to cut your arrow 28 inches, that's what you're cutting the carbon from the throat of the nock. And basically, the outsert adds an inch to that lengthwise, but it also comes back over the arrow 3/4 of an inch. So we keep that in mind, because let's say a guy's a 28-inch draw. I'm not going to tell him to cut an arrow 26 inches because the back of the collar could interfere with his rest.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking in my head. That, and it reminded me of the old overdraws and how stupid and silly that was, with the broadhead dangling right over your wrist,
Well, you got to realize I worked in a hunting and fishing store and ran an archery shop in the 80s and 90s, and I can tell you some crazy overdraw stories, because that was back in the day. So if you had an arrow longer than 24 inches, you were a goober.
Yeah.
Everybody was cutting them as short as they could get them. But anyway, no. So what we're doing is we're basically designing an arrow system for each individual shooter, each individual hunter, because it's not a one size fits all. That is super important for guys to realize, that it's not a one size fits all.
No, that's good information, I think. And if I order some, I'll keep that in mind. And that's something for everybody else to kind of keep in mind, to just maybe even contact you and kind of work through that process then.
Yeah,
because
that's what we do. We talk to everybody, Luke.
Every single person. I like that.
Yep.
I like it. So with that being said, I think that's a good point to wrap it up. I was super curious about the product, and enjoyed talking to you about the different hunting stories, even before we actually remembered to hit the record button.
Sure.
And it's been good talking to you. So can you tell people where to find you and all the products and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, we only have our website, Day 6 Gear. We have an Instagram page. We do monitor that. We do have a Facebook page. It just gets mirrored or whatever we do on Instagram.
That's kind of like
mine. I literally, I don't ever go to Facebook because it gets me in a bad mood, and I've got to hire somebody to look at that for me, because I don't like looking at it. I get so upset. Look at all the crap on there. But So if you want to reach us, you can reach us through Instagram. You can reach us through the website. If you call, that's what I encourage guys to do. Either myself or Dakota is going to answer the phone, and all we do is bow hunt. We don't have any other interest in life other than that. So we're not going to steer you towards industry trends or gadgets. We're just going to get you set up for being efficient. We just started a YouTube channel, only because I love video in our hunts. I love making really good films. I've always kind of had a passion for that. So we started doing that this year, and we are releasing one film a month. So that is not there to sell anything. It's just something we like to do. And we're kind of trying to use it as a way to highlight some of our customers, some of our friends, and kind of show the way we hunt, and also show kind of our approach to hunting and how we respect it, and kind of, the way we want to represent ourselves as hunters,
Nice.
which is super important to me. We did put a video on there on how to install our component system. We just got through filming a video on sharpening broadheads, which I think is going to be super popular for guys, because we get a lot of guys saying, man, I can't even sharpen a knife. How would I sharpen a head? So we're kind of going to show how easy that is. And then we're working on some tuning stuff, but it's mostly just going to be really cool films about our customers, our friends, not about us, but just, people that we interact with, and people that represent hunting the right way in our opinion.
I totally understand that. That's a good point and way to represent that, because especially this day and age, social media, that kind of clouds things a little bit. But I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for talking and really filling me and the listeners in on your product and some cool hunting stories along the way. And
Sure.
Thank you, man. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, you bet. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.